Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
And I'm Ian.
Today we're talking about some great albums from 1985. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So it's hard to believe that 1985 was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But I will say that once I started going through music or albums that were released in 85, I realized that it wasn't a very strong year for music. I think there were some really good albums that came out that year. I feel like it was, sandwiched between 84 and 86, which there are so many great albums for both those years.
And I feel like there were a lot of bands doing songs for movies that year that were really good, but not albums in general.
Yeah.
For example, Back to the Future. Huey Lewis and News did 3 or 4 great songs for that movie.
Yeah, Sports came out in 85.
No, it didn't. It came out in 83.
Really? Are you sure about that?
Yep. Look it up. It was 83, I think.
No, you're right. It was 83.
Okay. So if we were doing 83, that would have been on my list.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that was a good album.
It was a really good album.
I think because I tie it together with Back to the Future.
Yeah, exactly. To be honest with you, for the longest time, I also thought it came out in 85, but a few years ago, I played it on Spotify.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
83.
I bought the anniversary edition of it a couple years ago. So yeah, that
makes sense. Yeah.
So these aren't in any kind of order because I don't know. I have a hard time ranking albums, even for bands I really love and albums I really love.
I agree. Yeah.
Because I rank albums and then 5 minutes later it could be completely different. But the album Knee Deep in the Hoopla by Starship. This is an album where, of course, everyone knows We Built This City.
Yeah.
What was the other big single that was off this one?
Sarah was a big hit because they had a video for that. I just remember there being a tornado in it.
Yeah, those are the 2 big songs off here. But this is an album that I didn't even really appreciate until a couple of years ago when this got reissued. I bought it just because of We Built This City. And then I sat down and actually listened to the album. And I was like, damn, there's actually some other really great songs on here.
For a band that really, they're not what they originally started out as.
Yes.
Everyone should know the history. Jefferson Airplane, Jefferson Starship. Yeah. And I think there was something in between, or Hot Tuna.
Well, Hot Tuna split off of Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah. Right. So this is kind of like the coming together of some of those elements, or re-coming together of some of those elements. Because Mickey Thomas, the lead singer, was not in any. He was in Jefferson Starship, but he didn't sing with Grace Slick until this album. I agree. To me, this is like a nostalgia album.
Yes,
I don't know if I would listen to it and go, "Oh, this is a masterpiece," but listening to it brings me right back to 1985.
Oh, absolutely.
So I don't have any props for my choices. These are all albums that I like or I've had them on CD or cassette in the past. Yeah. But I don't have them now.
I think it's probably has to do with kind of the weakness of 1985.
I feel it does. And then some of these I might buy now that I've looked at them and reevaluated to a degree. But my first one is Phil Collins, No Jacket Required. Had a bunch of big hits on it.
Actually, I might actually have a copy of that. I'm not 100% sure. I might have a copy of that.
Okay. It's a studio on it. And,
it was a good album.
I forgot. I forgot already how many good... There's 3 or 4 big hits off this album. So it's definitely... I would rank this in with some of the better Genesis albums of the era. And the fact that this came out in 85 and Genesis Invisible Touch, which was a huge hit, came out in 86. Yeah. I would say a lot of his songwriting here bled over into that.
Absolutely. So, for sure.
So I definitely would throw this out as a big 1985 album.
Yeah. This next album is one, I think nostalgia probably plays a little bit of a role in this one. I know you do not like this album.
I do not like this album.
And that is Theater of Pain by Mly Crew. If I was to go back and look at Mly Crew albums, this is probably my least favorite album of theirs. And there is some really skippable tracks on here. I would say probably a quarter of the album I could probably do without. But the strength of this album, the strength of a few songs on this album, I think really makes it a high quality album for 1985.
The only thing I love about this album is the cover.
The artwork is
It's simple, but it's awesome.
Yes, it's very recognizable.
Yes.
Probably one of the most recognizable albums of that year.
So my next one was a big album for the year, but I could have just easily have gone on our most overlooked albums of the 80s, honestly. And it's Around the World in a Day by The Revolution. I mean, it had some hits on it, but it was hugely overshadowed by Purple Rain.
Yeah, pretty much by every other album that Prince released in the
Arguably,
80s.
yes. But it had Red Beret on it. I mean, that was a huge hit. So, I mean, it's definitely an album that, for me, I remember it being around. And I remember it having some presence. But it was always going to be, like, not Purple Rain.
Yeah. And that's the one thing that I think, one of the reasons why it gets so overlooked is because of Purple Rain, because of 1999. He had so many other big albums around that time.
Right.
That were like huge popular albums. They were like career defining albums, and Around the World is a really good album.
Yeah, and like I said, it had presence in '85. I remember it having presence.
Yeah,
that's why I moved it to this list. But it just, like I said, it could just easily have been on our overlooked albums.
Yeah, so. And I think one of the things that hurt it is, it only had like one big hit off of it. Right, I think it was only just
I have to look again, but yeah, Red Beret for sure.
But it was one of those albums where, and a lot of Prince's albums were like this. Yeah, Raspberry Beret. A lot of Prince's albums were like this, where like the deeper cuts were really what made those albums special, and not always the big hit singles.
Well, the singles are the sizzle, as they should be. They're the ones that bring you in. But the problem is that singles sell. So band artists, or not artists, but record companies, especially in the 80s and into the 90s, they sold singles. They that's what they wanted. They wanted just albums of singles, whereas singles are supposed to be the sizzle, bring you in. And that's in this case, I feel like that was, I mean, true of all of Prince's music. If it's on the radio, it's a good song, but it may not be as good as any of the other songs.
Yeah, absolutely. If I were to pick the best album from 1985, this is definitely one that would be up there,
contender.
Probably in the top 2 or 3 for sure. It'd be definitely a contender for the number 1 spot, and that's Scarecrow by John Mellencamp.
I think it's one of his best albums. It might even be his best album.
I think American Fool is a better album.
Do you?
From beginning to end.
Okay.
But Scarecrow is one of those special albums where the songs that everyone knows on here, which, ROCK in the USA, Small Town was another huge song off of here. Those are the kind of songs that really, like you said earlier, the sizzle that brought everyone in on this album. And then when you start going through it, like those 2 songs aren't even close to being the best songs on this album. And I think this is the album where John Mellencamp really showed how talented of a musician he is.
A singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
That's a caliber of artist. There's musicians, there's songwriters, but singer-songwriter, to be interesting, to make music that stands out.
You have to be like a total package.
Exactly. So, and now you're right. I feel like this is an album that highlights Mellencamp's abilities.
Yeah, and like I said, I think American Fool is a better album, but Scarecrow is like a hair behind it. Like it's that close.
So my next one, if I had to pick like an album that truly stands out for me for a year, I did have this on CD. It's Brothers in Arms by Dire Straits. This was a huge album.
Actually, I'm surprised I don't have a copy of that.
Well, they're releasing an anniversary deluxe edition this year, so I'll probably pick that up myself. Because I haven't had it on CD, but I sold it a long time ago.
No.
But I definitely need to get another copy of it. It's probably Dire Straits' best known album. I wouldn't say 100% it's their best album, but it could be. I think
it's their best selling album.
It's their most commercial album for sure. But they dominated because of the main song.
Yeah.
But for me, again, it's the other songs that stand out the most. Even their other single, Walk of Life, I think is a better song, and I think it really highlights the quality of their songwriting abilities. Mark Knopfler's songwriting abilities. And it was a slight departure too. It was a little bit rougher, a little bit more rockier than some of their earlier stuff. So it was different, the same, and I don't know. It's a great album. And like I said, 85 is a weak year. I was surprised at how weak it was going through this. But if there was an album that truly stood out, that would be like close to my number 1 of that year.
Another big monumental album for me from 1985 is Southern Accents by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. So the video for Don't Come Around Here No More is iconic. And that's the video actually that got me into Tom Petty. I remember buying this on cassette. It was probably, so this came out in 85, so it was probably 86, late 86, early 87 is when I got this on cassette, and I wore that cassette out. And it's...
Yeah. For me, I agree. The video, some of the songs of this album stood out, and I was familiar with them. For me, it wasn't until Full Moon Fever that I was really starting to like get into Tom Petty.
Yeah.
But going back retroactively, yes,
Yeah.
that was... I had this on CD. Another one I really need to replace.
Yeah. It was this album and then Full Moon Fever. Those are the two albums that really made me a fan of Tom Petty. I guess Damn the Torpedoes also. It was probably those three albums because I had all three of them on cassette. Actually, I think I had...
Damn the Torpedoes had Refugee on it,
Yeah.
right?
I think it was Damn the Torpedoes and Southern Accents were the two cassettes I owned and listened to all the time. And then, of course, once Full Moon Fever came out, that kind of dominated my listening for a while.
I think this album kind of started it, but Full Moon Fever took it to the next level of just defining what Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers music would be going forward.
Yeah, you can, like, if you're a fan of Full Moon Fever, you can hear aspects of that album on Southern Accents.
I agree. So my last one, this is actually for a friend, a fan.
Even though it's a good album.
It's a good album. And
actually, I considered this album.
Did you?
Yeah.
It's Whitney Houston by Whitney Houston. I've never owned the album, but every song on there, or at least a vast majority of the songs on there, I'm familiar with.
It's one of those albums where Whitney Houston's debut or her self-titled album was her debut.
I think it was her debut
album.
Yeah.
It could have been a greatest hits album.
I agree.
Every single song on there was absolutely massive, and I think it was hard for her to really kind of replicate that on some of her other albums that came out after that.
But the thing that gets me with it though is, even though it's a debut album, you already know that her vocal abilities are second to none.
Yeah.
Right from the get-go.
Yeah.
And that's what, to me, that's the endearing quality of Whitney Houston's entire life. That no one really, I can't think of another singer like her.
Whitney Houston's one of those artists where if you watch, I don't typically watch reality TV, but when you watch like the Voice or American Karaoke, as I like to call it, Whitney Houston's one of those artists where you stay away from their songs. Don't ever go up there and try to sing their music.
No.
Her music.
No, because they all, and to be fair, I get it. They all want to be able to do it, but they never can.
You're gonna fail every time.
You're gonna fail. I don't even know if anyone could truly get close. Some people might, and there are other vocalists or other singers out there who might potentially be as good down the road, or are at the peak. They're the highest they're ever going to get, and they're close.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's
only one Whitney Houston.
Exactly.
So when I said the Scarecrow was in contention for being my number one album for 85,
this is the challenger.
This is the challenger, and that is The Head on the Door by The Cure. I've been a huge fan of The Cure ever since I was young. I was under 10 when I first started listening to The Cure. And this is one of those albums where there's not a lot of hits on here. You had In Between Days and A Night Like This was the other big track on here. Those two tracks, I think A Night Like This in particular was the song that made me want to listen to this album. I remember the first time I even heard that song. I don't know if it was on the radio or what it was. And I was like, oh, I've never listened to that album. So I went back, and this is probably late 80s. It was around the time that Disintegration came out.
Yeah.
Was when I really kind of started going back and listening to more of their stuff. And this album right away has always been, this is one of those albums I put up there with Disintegration, with Pornography, as some of the best stuff that The Cure ever did. Just like the darkness that's on this album, a lot of other musicians weren't doing, especially in the mainstream in 1985.
Oh, right. Yeah, I feel like, because like I said, this album kind of would have been under my radar compared to those other albums. But for me, I probably didn't even start really getting into The Cure until the 90s.
Yeah.
And I really, maybe even, that was just like early stages. It was probably maybe even later, like early 2000s when I was really delving into it. So this was definitely an under the radar album back then.
Yeah.
My familiarity with The Cure came from like MTV and radio play. So if it was on the radio, I was familiar with it. But or maybe more arguably, if it was on MTV, I was familiar with it.
This is I would put this as probably their third best album behind Wish and Disintegration.
Okay. It's definitely an album I need to examine more. Their whole catalog, though, for me is probably something I need to examine more.
Well, that's all I get for today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what some of your favorite albums from 1985 were. Because like I said, I think it was kind of a down year, but there were some really great albums, some huge albums that came out that year.
And you might mention something that we didn't even consider.
Oh, I'm sure. There's probably a couple of big ones, big albums I'm completely
Change our
missing on.
mind. Change our mind on that.
But let us know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you see a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.